The morning of June 15, 2016, started like any other for marine biologist Dr. Sarah Chen, as she prepared for another research expedition to the remote Serpent Islands off the coast of Maine. The 34-year-old scientist had been studying the effects of climate change on coastal ecosystems for nearly a decade, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to discover on the seemingly abandoned Gull's Rest Island. The Coast Guard helicopter descended through the thick, morning fog, its rotors cutting through the silence that had blanketed these waters for over a century. Sarah pressed her face against the small window, watching as the rocky outcropping emerged from the mist like a forgotten world. Gull's Rest Island had been uninhabited since the lighthouse was automated in 1987, leaving behind only the skeletal remains of a small fishing community and the weathered bones of abandoned buildings. "We'll pick you up at 1600 hours, shouted pilot Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez over the engine noise. "Weather's supposed to turn nasty after that." Sarah nodded, gathering her equipment as the helicopter touched down on the island's only flat clearing. The moment her boots hit the rocky ground, she felt an overwhelming sense of isolation wash over her. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the jagged coastline and the occasional cry of a seagull overhead. The island stretched roughly 2 miles. From north to south, its landscape dominated by dense pine forests, rocky cliffs, and the remnants of what had once been a thriving fishing village. Sarah's mission was straightforward: collect water samples from the island's freshwater springs and document any changes in the local marine life populations. What she didn't expect was to stumble upon one of the most haunting mysteries in recent American history. As she made her way toward the northern shore, following an overgrown path that had once connected the lighthouse to the village, Sarah noticed something peculiar. Scattered among the wild blueberry bushes and tangled undergrowth were pieces of what appeared to be camping equipment. A faded blue tarp caught her attention first, partially buried under years of fallen leaves and debris. "That's odd," she muttered to herself, kneeling down to examine the material more closely. The tarp was clearly man-made, but it had been exposed to the elements for years. As she pulled it free from the vegetation, more items became visible: a rusted camping stove, the remains of a sleeping bag, and what looked like pieces of a small tent. Sarah's scientific mind immediately began cataloging the discovery. Someone had definitely camped here, but when? And why would anyone choose such a remote and inhospitable location? The nearest inhabited land was over 30 miles away, and the waters around Serpent Islands were notoriously dangerous, with hidden reefs and unpredictable currents that had claimed dozens of vessels over the years. As she continued her investigation, pushing deeper into the overgrown campsite, Sarah's heart began to race. This wasn't just random camping gear left behind by careless tourists. The arrangement of the items, the way they were scattered, suggested something far more serious had happened here. There were signs of a struggle, or at least a hasty departure. Clothes were strewn about, a child's sneaker hung from a low branch, and what appeared to be family photographs were scattered across the ground, their images faded and water-damaged beyond recognition. But it was what she found next that made her blood run cold. Partially hidden beneath a collapsed section of tent, wrapped in what remained of a plastic bag, was a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and weathered, but the binding had held together remarkably well considering its exposure to the harsh coastal elements. Sarah's hands trembled as she carefully extracted the journal from its makeshift protection. The leather was soft and pliable, suggesting it hadn't been there as long as some of the other items. As she opened the cover, her breath caught in her throat. Written in careful, feminine handwriting on the first page were the words, "Property of Jennifer Henderson. If found, please contact the authorities. We are the family that disappeared from the Sea Dreams on June 23, 2001. The date hit Sarah like a physical blow. June 23, 2001. She knew that date. Every resident of coastal Maine knew that date. It was the day the Henderson family had vanished without a trace during what should have been a routine pleasure cruise along the coast. The case had dominated local news for months, spawning countless theories and search efforts that ultimately led nowhere. David Henderson, 42, a successful Portland attorney. His wife Jennifer, 38, a high school English teacher. Their children, Michael, 16, star of his high school basketball team, and little Emma, just 8 years old, who had been excited about her first real boat trip. They had rented a 35-foot cabin cruiser called Sea Dreams for a week-long family vacation, planning to explore the coastal islands and enjoy some quality time together away from the pressures of David's demanding law practice. The boat had been found 3 days later, drifting empty near Pemaquid Point, its engine still running and the radio crackling with unanswered Coast Guard calls. There were no signs of struggle aboard the vessel, no indication of what had happened to the family. Their life jackets were still in their storage compartment, the dinner Jennifer had been preparing was still warm on the galley stove, and Emma's favorite stuffed dolphin was sitting on her bunk as if she had just put it down for a moment. The Coast Guard had launched the largest search and rescue operation in Maine's history. Helicopters scoured the coastline, dive teams explored every underwater cave and crevice, and volunteers combed beaches from Bar Harbor to Portsmouth. But after 3 weeks of intensive searching, the operation was scaled back, and eventually, the case was classified as a presumed drowning with bodies lost at sea. Now, 15 years later, Sarah held in her hands what might be the key to solving one of Maine's most enduring mysteries. Her scientific training told her to handle the evidence carefully, to contact the authorities immediately, but her human curiosity was overwhelming. She needed to know what had happened to the Henderson family. She needed to understand how they had ended up on this remote island, and why Jennifer Henderson had felt compelled to document their experience in this journal. As she carefully turned the pages, Sarah realized that the journal contained far more than just a record of their time on the island. It was a detailed account of their final days written in Jennifer's clear, precise handwriting. The entries began normally enough, describing their excitement about the vacation and their plans for exploring the coast. But as Sarah read on, the tone of the entries began to change, becoming increasingly desperate and frightened. The last entry was dated July 15, 2001, nearly 3 weeks after the family had disappeared. 3 weeks during which they had somehow survived on this barren island. 3 weeks during which Jennifer Henderson had documented their struggle for survival and their growing realization that rescue might never come. Sarah closed the journal and looked around the abandoned campsite with new eyes. This wasn't just the remnants of camping equipment scattered by wind and weather. This was the final resting place of the Henderson family's hopes and dreams, the place where they had fought for their lives against impossible odds. Sarah's hands shook as she carefully placed the journal in her waterproof sample bag. The weight of her discovery was overwhelming, but she knew she had to continue her investigation before the Coast Guard helicopter returned. Every piece of evidence on this island could be crucial to understanding what had happened to the Henderson family during those lost weeks in the summer of 2001. The campsite told a story of desperate improvisation and gradual deterioration. As Sarah examined the area more carefully, she began to piece together the family's struggle for survival. The camping equipment wasn't professional gear. It appeared to be makeshift shelters constructed from materials salvaged from their boat or found on the island. A section of the boat's canvas awning had been stretched between 2 pine trees to create a lean-to shelter. Pieces of the boat's interior cushions were scattered around what had obviously been a sleeping area. Near what appeared to have been their cooking area, Sarah found the remains of a signal fire. The stones were still arranged in a careful circle, and she could see layers of ash and charcoal that suggested the fire had been maintained for an extended period. Scattered around the fire pit were the remnants of their attempts to signal for help. Pieces of reflective material, probably from emergency blankets, and what looked like the remains of a makeshift flag constructed from a bright orange life jacket. But it was the evidence of the family's daily struggle that truly broke Sarah's heart. She found a small area where someone had attempted to create a garden, carefully arranging rocks to protect tiny seedlings that had long since withered away. Near the freshwater spring that had probably kept them alive, she discovered a primitive water collection system made from pieces of plastic sheeting and boat parts, designed to catch and funnel rainwater into containers. The children's presence was evident throughout the campsite. Emma's toys were scattered in a small area that had been cleared of rocks and debris, creating a makeshift playground. A jump rope made from boat rope was tied between 2 trees, and Sarah found the remains of what appeared to be a dollhouse, constructed from driftwood and decorated with shells and sea glass. Michael's basketball, deflated but still recognizable, sat wedged between 2 rocks near what had been the family's sleeping area. As Sarah continued her investigation, she began to understand the layout of their temporary home. The family had chosen their location well, positioning their camp near the freshwater spring but protected from the worst of the coastal winds by a natural windbreak of pine trees and rocky outcroppings. They had clear sight lines to the ocean in multiple directions, maximizing their chances of spotting potential rescue vessels. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery was what Sarah found near the edge of the campsite. Carefully, arranged in a small clearing were 4 crosses made from driftwood and bound together with strips of fabric. Each cross bore a name carved into the wood with what must have been a knife or sharp stone: David, Jennifer, Michael, and Emma Henderson. Below each name was a date: July 15, 2001, the same date as the final entry in Jennifer's journal. Sarah stared at the makeshift memorial, her mind racing to understand what she was seeing. Had the family died on July 15th? Had Jennifer somehow known their end was near when she wrote that final entry? Or was this memorial something else entirely, perhaps a symbolic gesture of their former lives, a way of marking the death of their old existence and their transformation into castaways? The questions multiplied as Sarah examined each cross more closely. The craftsmanship was careful and deliberate, not the hasty work of someone in immediate distress. Someone had taken time to carve the names and dates, to arrange the crosses in a perfect line facing the ocean. But who? And why? As the morning progressed, Sarah's investigation revealed more puzzling details. She found evidence that the family had explored much of the island during their time there. Worn paths led from the main campsite to various points of interest: the old lighthouse, several vantage points along the cliffs, and what appeared to be a secondary shelter near the island's southern shore. This secondary site was smaller and more primitive than the main camp, consisting of little more than a lean-to shelter and a small fire pit. But the location was significant. It offered an unobstructed view of the shipping lanes that ran between Portland and the Canadian Maritimes. If the family had been trying to signal passing vessels, this would have been the ideal location. Sarah found more evidence of their signaling attempts scattered around this secondary site. Pieces of mirror, probably from the boat's bathroom, had been arranged to catch and reflect sunlight. The remains of what appeared to be a large SOS sign, constructed from white stones against the dark rocky shore, were still partially visible despite 15 years of weather and erosion. But perhaps the most intriguing discovery at the southern site was a small cave, barely large enough for one person, that had been carefully prepared as some kind of shelter or hiding place. The entrance had been partially concealed with branches, and stones in the interior contained a small cache of supplies: canned food, water containers, and what appeared to be medical supplies. Why would the family have needed a hidden shelter? What were they hiding from? The questions continued to multiply as Sarah explored every corner of the island, documenting each discovery with her camera and GPS unit. As she made her way back toward the main campsite, Sarah noticed something she had missed during her initial investigation. Carved into the bark of a large pine tree near the family's sleeping area was a message, the letters deep and clear despite the passage of time. They came back. "We're hiding. If you find this, tell them we tried to survive. JH 7/14/01. The message was dated just one day before the final journal entry, one day before the date carved into the memorial crosses. Sarah stared at the carved words, her mind struggling to process their implications. They came back? Who came back? And why would the Henderson family need to hide from their potential rescuers? The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture that Sarah didn't want to believe. This wasn't a simple story of a family lost at sea and struggling to survive on a remote island. Something else had happened here. Something that had forced the Hendersons to hide. Something that had ultimately led to their deaths on July 15, 2001. Sarah checked her watch. It was already past noon, and the Coast Guard helicopter would be returning in less than 4 hours. She needed to read Jennifer Henderson's journal, needed to understand what had really happened during those final weeks. But she also knew that she was no longer just a marine biologist collecting water samples. She had become the first person to discover evidence of one of Maine's most famous missing persons cases, and the responsibility was overwhelming. As she settled down near the freshwater spring to read the journal, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The island felt different now, charged with the weight of its tragic history. Every shadow seemed to hide secrets. Every sound carried the echo of voices long silenced. She opened the journal to the first entry, dated June 23, 2001, and began to read Jennifer Henderson's account of their final days. What she discovered would challenge everything she thought she knew about survival, family, and the lengths people will go to protect the ones they love. Sarah's heart pounded as she opened Jennifer Henderson's journal to the first entry. The handwriting was neat and controlled, the words of a woman who had no idea that she was documenting the beginning of her family's final chapter. June 23, 2001, Day 1. What an adventure this is turning out to be. David was right about needing this family time. The kids are so excited, and even Michael has put away his Game Boy to help with the boat. We're anchored in a beautiful cove near some small islands about 20 miles from the coast. David says we'll explore them tomorrow. Emma found a starfish this morning and insisted on naming it Sparkles. I love seeing her so happy and carefree. The weather is perfect, and David is in his element playing captain. He's been studying the charts all morning, planning our route for the next few days. We're going to visit several of the outer islands, maybe do some fishing, and just enjoy being together without the constant interruption of his work phone. I'm writing this while the kids are swimming off the back of the boat. The water is so clear you can see straight to the bottom. Michael is teaching Emma how to snorkel, and she's giggling so much she keeps getting water in her mask. These are the moments I want to remember forever. Sarah smiled despite the circumstances. Jennifer's joy was infectious, even 15 years later. But knowing what was coming made every happy moment feel like a countdown to tragedy. June 24, 2001, Day 2. Something strange happened today. We were exploring one of the smaller islands when we heard a boat approaching. David was excited, thinking it might be other vacationers, but when the boat came into view, something felt wrong. It was a large fishing vessel, much bigger than anything you'd expect to see in these waters, and it was moving too fast for the conditions. The boat circled our anchorage twice without responding to David's radio calls. The men on deck were watching us through binoculars, but they never waved or acknowledged us in any way. David tried hailing them on multiple channels, but they never responded. After about 10 minutes, they just left, heading north toward the Canadian waters. David thinks they were probably just curious about our boat, but I can't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way they watched us felt predatory. I'm probably being paranoid, but I've asked David to move us to a different anchorage tomorrow just to be safe. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The mysterious fishing vessel was the first hint that the Henderson family's vacation was about to take a dark turn. She continued reading, her scientific mind cataloging every detail that might be important. June 25, 2001, Day 3. They came back. The same fishing boat appeared again this morning just after sunrise. This time they anchored about a quarter-mile away and launched a smaller boat. 3 men came over to us, claiming they were having engine trouble and needed to use our radio. David, being David, immediately offered to help, but something about these men made my skin crawl. They were rough-looking, with accents I couldn't place, and they kept looking around our boat like they were cataloging everything we had. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, kept staring at Emma in a way that made me want to grab her and hide. They used our radio for about 10 minutes, speaking in what sounded like a foreign language. When David asked if everything was okay, the scarred man just smiled and said their business partners would be joining them soon. Then they left, but not before the scarred man told David that these were dangerous waters and that we should be more careful about where we anchor. I begged David to leave immediately, but he thinks I'm overreacting. He says they were probably just fishermen having a bad day. But I know what I saw in that man's eyes. We're not safe here. Sarah's hands were trembling now. Jennifer's maternal instincts had been absolutely correct. Whatever these men were involved in, the Henderson family had stumbled into something dangerous. She flipped ahead, looking for more details about the mysterious fisherman. June 26, 2001, Day 4. We tried to leave this morning, but our engine won't start. David thinks it's just a fuel line problem, something he can fix, but I can't. Help wondering if those men did something to our boat yesterday. They had plenty of opportunity while they were using our radio. The fishing boat is still anchored nearby, and I've seen them watching us through binoculars. David radioed the Coast Guard to report our engine trouble, but we're so far from shore that it will be hours before anyone can reach us. I'm trying not to panic, but every instinct I have is screaming that we need to get away from here. Michael has noticed my anxiety and keeps asking if everything is okay. I don't want to frighten the children, but I'm starting to think we should abandon the boat and try to reach one of the nearby islands. At least on land we'd have places to hide if necessary. David thinks I'm being ridiculous, but he's agreed to work on the engine while I pack emergency supplies just in case. I'm putting together food, water, and basic survival gear. If we have to abandon ship, I want us to be prepared. The entries were becoming more urgent, Jennifer's fear palpable in every word. Sarah could imagine the tension aboard the Sea Dreams as the family realized they were trapped in increasingly dangerous circumstances. June 27, 2001. Day 5. They boarded us this morning. 3 boats surrounded us just after dawn and there was nowhere to run. The scarred man, who seems to be their leader, told David that we had seen too much and that they couldn't let us leave. When David demanded to know what they were talking about, the man just laughed and said we'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're smugglers. Drug smugglers using these remote islands as a transfer point. We witnessed one of their operations without realizing it, and now they consider us a threat. The scarred man, who the others call Captain, says they can't risk us reporting their location to the authorities. They've taken our radio and disabled our engine completely. David tried to negotiate with them, offering money, promising we'd never tell anyone what we saw, but the captain just shook his head. He says they have a zero-tolerance policy for witnesses. I'm writing this while they're deciding what to do with us. The children are terrified, and I'm trying to stay calm for their sake. Emma keeps asking why the bad men won't let us go home. I don't know what to tell her. If anyone finds this journal, please know that we never meant to interfere with anyone's business. We're just a family trying to enjoy a vacation together. Please tell our families that we love them. Sarah had to stop reading for a moment. The transformation from Jennifer's initial joy to her growing terror was heartbreaking, but she needed to understand what happened next, how the family had ended up on Gull's Rest Island. The Coast Guard helicopter was still hours away, but Sarah felt an urgent need to finish reading the journal before she had to leave the island. She settled back against a pine tree and continued with Jennifer's account of their ordeal. Jennifer's handwriting became more erratic as Sarah continued reading. The entries revealed the family's growing desperation as they realized their situation was far worse than initially thought. Day 3 on the island. I'm trying to stay strong for Emma and Jake, but David is scaring me. He keeps talking about swimming back to the mainland, even though we can barely see it on the horizon. The kids don't understand why we can't just call for help. How do I explain that our phone has no signal and our emergency beacon was lost with the boat? Sarah paused, looking up from the journal to scan the horizon herself. Even in daylight, the mainland was barely visible as a thin gray line against the sky. The idea of swimming that distance seemed impossible, yet she could understand David's desperation. When you're watching your children face starvation, impossible starts to look like the only option. We found a small freshwater spring near the center of the island today. Thank God for that. David built a shelter using driftwood and some old tarps we found washed up on the beach. The kids think it's an adventure, but I can see the fear in David's eyes when he thinks they're not looking. Emma keeps asking when we're going home, and I keep telling her, soon, sweetheart, soon. But how soon is soon when you're trapped on a piece of rock in the middle of nowhere? David found some old rope tangled in the rocks, probably from another boat that met the same fate as ours. How many people have been stranded here before us? The mention of other boats sent a chill through Sarah. She glanced around the island with new awareness, noticing details she'd missed before. There, half buried in the sand near the waterline, was what looked like a piece of fiberglass hull, and over there, caught between 2 rocks, the remnants of what might have been a life jacket, so faded and weathered it was impossible to determine its original color. Day 4. The kids are starting to understand that this isn't a game. Emma asked me why we can't just call Grandma to come pick us up. I had to explain that our phone doesn't work here, that there are no roads for cars, that we're surrounded by water. She looked at me with those big brown eyes and asked, "Are we lost, Mommy?" I told her we were just visiting, but I think she knows I'm lying. David spent most of the day trying to signal passing boats. We saw 3 today, 2 fishing vessels and what looked like a Coast Guard cutter in the distance. David waved our bright orange life jackets and even tried to start a signal fire, but they were too far away. The smoke from wet driftwood just made a pathetic gray wisp that disappeared in the wind. Jake found a dead seagull today and asked if we could eat it. The question broke my heart. My 7-year-old son is already thinking about survival, in ways no child should have to. David told him we'd save that as a last resort, but I saw him looking at that bird with serious consideration. Sarah could picture the scene, a desperate family watching boats pass by in the distance, their hopes rising and falling with each vessel that failed to notice their distress. She thought about all the times she'd been on boats herself, scanning the horizon but never really looking, never imagining that someone might be out there, desperately trying to get her attention. Day 5. Emma asked me today when we're going home. I told her soon, but I don't know if that's true anymore. We've been rationing the granola bars and crackers we salvaged, but we're running low. David tried fishing with a makeshift spear, but he's not having much luck. The kids are getting thinner. I caught David staring at the water for hours today, and I know what he's thinking. The distance to the mainland doesn't look that far when you're desperate enough. But I've seen the currents around this island, they're vicious. During high tide, the water moves so fast it creates little whirlpools near the rocks. If David tries to swim for it, I'll never see him again. Jake found something strange today. Old bones near the north shore. Animal bones, David says, but they looked almost human to me. I didn't tell the kids. This place feels wrong somehow, like we're not the first people to be stranded here. The mention of bones sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She glanced around the island with new eyes, wondering what other secrets Gull's Rest might be hiding. The Coast Guard needed to know about this discovery. But more than that, she was beginning to understand that the Henderson family's tragedy might be part of a larger, more sinister pattern. The bones were scattered, like something had been feeding on them. David thinks it was probably seabirds or crabs, but there were tooth marks that looked too big, too deliberate. I keep thinking about all the boats that must pass through these waters, all the people who might have ended up here over the years. How many families like ours have been trapped on this godforsaken piece of rock? Day 6. David is getting more agitated. He paces the beach for hours, scanning the horizon like he can will a rescue boat to appear. The kids follow him sometimes, and I can see them picking up on his anxiety. Emma has started having nightmares, crying out in her sleep for her stuffed rabbit that went down with the boat. Jake just sits quietly, watching everything with those serious eyes that seem too old for his face. We're down to our last few granola bars. David caught a small fish yesterday with his improvised spear, but it was barely enough for one person, let alone 4. We gave most of it to the kids, told them we weren't hungry, but I can see David's ribs starting to show through his shirt, and I know I'm losing. Weight, too. I found more debris today. Pieces of other boats, other lives interrupted by this place. There's a cooler wedged between some rocks that must have been there for years, judging by the barnacles growing on it. Inside, I found a child's toy boat. The paint faded but still recognizable. Someone else's child played with that boat, dreamed of adventures on the water. Did they end up here too? Sarah had to stop reading for a moment. The image of Jennifer finding remnants of other tragedies was almost too much to bear. She looked around the island again, this time seeing it not as a picturesque piece of wilderness, but as a graveyard of broken dreams and shattered families. Day 7. David is getting desperate. He talks constantly about building a raft, but with what? The driftwood here is rotted and waterlogged. I caught him staring at the water for hours today, and when I asked what he was thinking, he just said, "There has to be a way." The kids are asking fewer questions now. Emma barely speaks, and Jake just sits by the water throwing stones. I'm failing them. I'm failing as a mother, and I don't know how to fix this. I tried to make today special for them, told them stories about brave pirates and magical islands. Emma smiled for the first time in days when I described a princess who could talk to dolphins, but then she asked if the dolphins could take us home, and I had to watch that little spark of hope die in her eyes when I couldn't give her the answer she wanted. David found more bones today. Definitely human this time, part of a rib cage and what looks like a femur. He tried to hide them from me, but I saw him burying them near the tree line. How many people have died on this island? How many families have faced exactly what we're facing now? Jennifer's guilt and desperation bled through every word. Sarah found herself gripping the journal tighter, as if she could somehow reach back through time and help this struggling family. The entries painted a picture of people pushed beyond their limits, watching their children suffer while feeling completely powerless to help. I keep thinking about our last morning at home. Emma was complaining about having to wear her life jacket, said it was uncomfortable and made her look fat. I was impatient with her, told her to stop whining and just put it on. If I had known it would be the last normal conversation we'd ever have, I would have been more patient. I would have hugged her longer, told her how much I loved her. Jake asked me today if we're going to die here. The question came out of nowhere. We were sitting by the spring, and he just looked up at me with those serious eyes and asked. I told him no, of course not, that Daddy was going to figure out a way to get us home. But I think he could see the lie in my face. Children are so much smarter than we give them credit for. Tonight, David and I talked after the kids. Fell asleep. Really talked. For the first time since we've been here. He told me he's been having dreams about swimming to the mainland, dreams where he makes it and brings back help. But then he wakes up and sees the distance, sees the currents, and knows it's suicide. He's torn between the need to try something, anything, and the knowledge that if he fails, he'll be leaving us here alone. I told him we'd figure it out together, that we just needed to hold on a little longer. But, honestly, I'm starting to lose hope too. We've been here a week and no one has come looking for us. Our families probably think we're just having a great time on our boat trip, completely unaware that we're slowly starving on this cursed piece of rock. The final entry for this section was written in shakier handwriting, as if Jennifer's strength was already beginning to fail. Day 8. Emma gave her breakfast to Jake this morning. Said she wasn't hungry, but I can see her getting weaker. My beautiful little girl is sacrificing her own survival for her brother, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. David saw it too, and I watched something break inside him. He walked away without saying anything, but I could see his shoulders shaking. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. The kids need real food, medical attention, hope. All I can give them are stories and false promises. What kind of mother does that make me? Sarah closed the journal for a moment, overwhelmed by the raw emotion in Jennifer's words. She could feel the family's desperation as if it were her own, could imagine the impossible choices they faced every day. The island around her seemed to pulse with the echoes of their suffering, and she knew that what she'd read so far was only the beginning of their tragedy. The entries became shorter and more frantic as the days passed. Sarah could see Jennifer's mental state deteriorating through her increasingly desperate words, the careful penmanship of the early entries giving way to urgent scrawls that spoke of a mind under unbearable pressure. Day 9. David didn't sleep last night. I could hear him moving around outside the shelter, pacing back and forth along the shoreline. When I went to check on him around dawn, I found him standing waist-deep in the water, just staring toward the mainland. He didn't even notice me calling his name until I waded out and touched his shoulder. When he turned around, his eyes looked empty, like he wasn't really there anymore. The kids are getting scared of their father. Emma asked me why Daddy talks to himself now, and I didn't know what to tell her. Jake just watches David with those serious eyes, like he's trying to figure out what's wrong but doesn't have the words to ask. How do you explain to children that their father is slowly losing his mind from the stress of watching them starve? Sarah paused in her reading, looking out at the water where David Henderson had stood in his desperation. The tide was coming in now, and she could see how the currents moved around the island, treacherous eddies and undertows that would make swimming to the mainland not just difficult, but virtually impossible. Yet she could understand how a desperate father might convince himself it was worth trying. Day 10. David tried to swim to the mainland today. I begged him not to, but he said he had to try. He kissed each of the kids goodbye, told them he was going to bring back help, and then he just walked into the water like he was going for a casual swim. I screamed until my throat was raw. Emma and Jake stood beside me on the beach, crying and calling for their daddy to come back. He made it maybe 200 yards before the current started pulling him out to sea. I could see him fighting against it, his strokes becoming more frantic and desperate as he realized he was being swept away from both the island and the mainland. For 20 minutes, I thought I was going to watch my husband drown while my children stood beside me. I was already trying to figure out how I would survive alone with Emma and Jake, how I would explain to them that Daddy wasn't coming back. But somehow, by some miracle, he managed to fight his way back to shore. He collapsed on the beach, coughing up seawater and shaking from exhaustion and hypothermia. Emma won't stop crying. She keeps asking if Daddy is going to die, and I don't know what to tell her. That I don't know? That I'm terrified too? That watching him nearly drown was the most helpless I've ever felt in my life? She's only 5 years old. She shouldn't have to see her parents falling apart like this. The image of two young children watching their father nearly drown was almost too much for Sarah to bear. She could picture Emma's tear-streaked face, Jake's confused terror, Jennifer's desperate screams echoing across the water. The psychological trauma this family endured went far beyond simple hunger and thirst. David won't talk to me now. He just sits by the water, staring at the horizon with this defeated look in his eyes. When I try to touch him or ask if he's okay, he just shrugs me off. It's like he's already given up, like that failed swim attempt broke something inside him that can't be fixed. Jake brought his father a cup of water from the spring today, and David didn't even acknowledge him. My 7-year-old son is trying to take care of his broken father, and it's breaking my heart. Children shouldn't have to be the strong ones. They shouldn't have to comfort their parents. Day 11. We're completely out of food now. David caught a small fish yesterday with his makeshift spear, but it was barely enough for one person, let alone 4. We gave most of it to the kids, told them we had eaten earlier, but I can see Emma's ribs now through her shirt. My beautiful little girl is wasting away, and there's nothing I can do about it. Jake asked me today if we're going to starve to death. The question was so matter-of-fact, so calm, that it took me a moment to process what he'd said. When I asked him where he'd heard that phrase, he said he'd been listening to David and me talking at night. We thought they were asleep, but apparently Jake has been hearing everything. Our fears, our arguments, our growing desperation. I tried to reassure him, told him that people would come looking for us soon, that we just had to be patient a little longer. But the words felt hollow even as I said them. It's been over a week since we were supposed to return from our trip. Surely someone has noticed we're missing by now. Surely someone is looking for us. Sarah knew from the Coast Guard reports that the Henderson family hadn't been reported missing until 3 days after they were supposed to return. David's brother had assumed they'd decided to extend their trip, and Jennifer's mother thought they might have had boat trouble and were staying in a marina somewhere. By the time anyone realized they were truly missing, the search area had become enormous. Day 12. I found more bones today. Definitely human this time. There's a skull partially buried near where we found the first ones, and what looks like the remains of a ribcage scattered among the rocks. Someone else died on this island, maybe more than one person. Are we going to end up like them? Are our bones going to be found by the next family that gets stranded here? Emma gave her portion of water to Jake today. Said she wasn't thirsty, but I can see how dry her lips are, how sunken her eyes have become. My 5-year-old daughter is sacrificing her own survival for her brother, and I don't know how to stop her. When I tried to make her drink, she just shook her head and said, "Jake needs it more." David is talking about making hard choices. I don't like the way he looks at the kids when he says it. Don't like the tone in his voice. He's not the man I married anymore. The hunger and desperation have changed him into something I don't recognize, something that scares me. The revelation about human remains made Sarah's blood run cold. But it was Jennifer's growing fear of her own husband that truly terrified her. She could read between the lines, could sense the dark thoughts that David was beginning to entertain. When people are pushed beyond their limits, when they're watching their children die slowly, the mind can go to very dark places. I caught David staring at Emma today with this strange expression on his face. When I asked him what he was thinking about, he just said, "She's suffering." The way he said it, so calm and matter-of-fact, made my blood freeze. I know what he's thinking, and I can't let him do it. I won't let him do it. Jake asked me today if we're going to die here, and for the first time, I couldn't lie to him. I just held him close and told him I loved him. He's so thin now, so weak. When he walks, he moves like an old man, careful and slow. No child should have to feel their body failing them like this. Day 13. Emma collapsed today while we were walking to the spring. Just fell down like her legs couldn't support her anymore. David carried her back to the shelter, and she felt so light in his arms, like she was already fading away. She's been sleeping most of the day, and when she's awake, she just stares at nothing with these glassy eyes. Jake sits beside his sister, holding her hand and singing the lullaby I used to sing to them when they were babies. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." His voice is so weak now, barely a whisper, but he keeps singing. My heart is breaking into a million pieces watching my children take care of each other while I stand by helplessly. David pulled me aside tonight and said we need to talk about the situation. I know what he wants to discuss, and I can't bear to hear it. He's going to suggest that we that we help Emma stop suffering. He's going to ask me to choose between watching my daughter starve slowly or, I can't even write the words. I told him no. I told him we don't give up, that we keep fighting until the very end. But I could see in his eyes that he thinks I'm being cruel, that I'm prolonging Emma's suffering for my own selfish reasons. Maybe he's right. Maybe holding on to hope is just another form of torture. Day 14. David is talking about making hard choices again. I don't like the way he looks at the kids when he says it. He's not the man I married anymore. The hunger and desperation have changed him into something I don't recognize. Emma hasn't opened her eyes today. She's still breathing, but it's so shallow, so labored. Jake refuses to leave her side, keeps trying to give her sips of water even though she can't swallow. He's appointed himself her protector, and it's the most heartbreaking thing I've ever seen. I keep thinking about our last normal day at home. Emma was excited about the boat trip, kept asking if she could help drive. Jake was worried about getting seasick and made me promise to bring his favorite crackers. They were so full of life, so eager for adventure. How did we go from that to this? How did a simple family vacation turn into a nightmare? David found a piece of rope. Today, thick and strong. He said it might be useful for signaling, but the way he looked at it, the way he tested its strength, I know what he's really thinking. I hid it while he was sleeping. I won't let him give up. I won't let him take the easy way out and leave me alone with the kids. Day 15. Jake asked me today if Emma is going to heaven. The question came out of nowhere, and I realized he understands more than I thought. He knows his sister is dying, knows that all our reassurances and false hope aren't going to save her. He's 7 years old, and he's already learned that sometimes love isn't enough. I told him that Emma is going to be okay, that we all are, but the words felt like lies even as I said them. He just nodded and went back to holding his sister's hand. He doesn't believe me anymore, and I don't blame him. Why should he trust the adults who brought him to this place and then failed to protect him? David is gone for hours at a time now, walking the perimeter of the island like a caged animal. When he comes back, he won't look at me or the kids. I think he's planning something, and I'm terrified of what it might be. The man I married would never hurt his children, but this isn't that man anymore. This is someone broken and desperate and capable of anything. The entries were becoming increasingly disturbing, painting a picture of a family's complete psychological breakdown in real time. Sarah realized she was reading about people pushed so far beyond their limits that they were no longer recognizable as the loving family they'd once been. Whatever happened next, she knew it wouldn't be good. Tonight, after the kids fell asleep, David told me he's been having dreams about swimming to the mainland again. But this time in the dreams he makes it. He brings back help and we're all rescued. He said the dreams feel so real that when he wakes up, he's surprised to find himself still on the island. I think he's losing touch with reality. The line between his desperate fantasies and the actual situation is blurring, and I'm afraid of what he might do if he can't tell the difference anymore. I need to stay awake tonight, need to watch him. I can't let him try to swim again, and I can't let him hurt the kids in some misguided attempt to end their suffering. Day 16. Emma opened her eyes this morning for the first time in 2 days. She looked at me and whispered, "Mommy, I'm hungry." Those 3 words broke something inside me that I didn't even know was still intact. I gave her the last drops of water we had saved, and she smiled at me like it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Jake found a small crab today, no bigger than a quarter. He brought it to Emma first, even though I could see how desperately hungry he was. She couldn't eat it, too weak to chew, so Jake ate it himself, but only after I convinced him that Emma wanted him to have it. The guilt in his eyes as he swallowed those tiny pieces of meat will haunt me forever. David came back from one of his walks with wild eyes and sand in his hair. He said he'd been digging near the north shore looking for the others. When I asked him what he meant, he just stared at me like I should understand. The people who came before us, Jennifer. They left signs. They left messages. I followed him to where he'd been digging and found a shallow pit filled with more bones. Definitely human. Definitely old. Among the bones, David had found something that made my blood freeze. A child's shoe, small and pink, with a cartoon character on the side. It was newer than the bones, maybe from the 1990s. Someone else brought their child to this island and that child never left. Are we following in their footsteps? Are we just the latest family to be claimed by this cursed place? David is convinced that the bones are trying to tell us something. He's arranged them in patterns around our shelter, says they're protecting us. I don't have the strength to argue with him anymore. If believing in bone magic helps him cope with watching our children die, then maybe it's better than the alternative. Day 17. Emma asked me to tell her about home today. She wanted to hear about her bedroom, her toys, her friends at school. As I described her pink walls and the stuffed animals on her bed, I watched her face light up with a joy I hadn't seen in weeks. For a few minutes, she wasn't a starving child on a deserted island. She was just my little girl, dreaming about the life she used to have. Jake has stopped asking when we're going home. Instead, he started asking me to tell him stories about when he grows up. Tell me about when I'm a daddy, he says. Tell me about my kids. I make up elaborate tales about his future family, his career, his adventures, all while knowing that he'll never live to see any of it. The cruelty of giving a dying child hope for a future he'll never have is almost unbearable. David found another shelter today, hidden in the rocks on the far side of the island. It's older than ours, built with more skill and care. Inside, he discovered carved messages on the walls. Names, dates, desperate pleas for rescue. The Morrison family, 1987, please find us. Sarah and Tommy Chen, 1994, we tried to swim home. If you find this, tell our families we love them. We're not the first family to be stranded here. We're not even the second or third. This island has been claiming lives for decades, maybe longer. The realization should terrify me, but instead, I feel a strange sense of comfort. We're not alone in our suffering. Other parents have held their dying children on this beach. Other families have faced the same impossible choices we're facing now. Day 18. Emma can't keep her eyes open anymore. She drifts in and out of consciousness, and when she's awake, she's not really present. She talks to people who aren't there. Her grandmother who died last year. Her imaginary friend from when she was 3. Sometimes she calls out for her daddy, but when David comes to her, she looks right through him like he's not there. Jake has appointed himself Emma's guardian angel. He sits beside her all day, fanning her with palm fronds when she gets too hot, covering her with his own shirt when she shivers. He's given up his own survival to make her more comfortable, and I don't have the heart to stop him. If these are our final days, maybe love is more important than prolonging the inevitable. David pulled me aside tonight and said we need to make a decision about Emma. She's suffering, Jennifer. Look at her. Really look at her. Is this living? I know he's right, but I can't bring myself to agree with what he's suggesting. She's my baby. She's my little girl. How do you choose to let your child go, even when holding on means watching her suffer? I found David's journal today, hidden under a pile of rocks near the water. His entries are very different from mine, darker, more desperate, filled with thoughts I can't bear to repeat. He's been planning something, and I'm terrified of what it might be. The man I married would never hurt his children, but this broken stranger wearing my husband's face, I don't know what he's capable of anymore. Day 19. Emma stopped breathing for almost a minute today. I thought she was gone, thought I was going to have to tell Jake that his sister had died, but then she gasped and opened her eyes, looked right at me and whispered, "I love you, Mommy." Those might be the last words she ever says to me, and they're perfect. Jake asked me today if it hurts to die. The question was so matter-of-fact, so calm, that it took me a moment to process what he'd said. When I asked him why he wanted to know, he said, "Because Emma looks like it hurts, and I don't want her to hurt anymore. My 7-year-old son is ready to let his sister go because he loves her too much to watch her suffer. How did my children become braver than their parents? David has been gone since dawn. I found a note under his pillow. I'm going to try one more time. If I don't make it back, tell the kids I love them. If I do make it back, we're all going home." He's trying to swim to the mainland again, even though we both know it's impossible. Part of me hopes he makes it. Part of me hopes he drowns quickly rather than suffering like we are. What kind of wife does that make me? I can see him in the water now, a tiny speck fighting against the current. Emma is unconscious beside me, and Jake is holding her hand, singing that lullaby again. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." His voice is so weak now, barely audible over the sound of the waves. We're all fading away, one breath at a time. Day 20. David didn't come back. I watched him disappear beneath the waves around sunset yesterday, and I haven't seen him since. Jake asked where Daddy went, and I told him that Daddy went to get help. It's not entirely a lie. In David's mind, that's exactly what he was doing. He died trying to save us, and maybe that's the best any of us can hope for. Emma hasn't opened her eyes since yesterday. Her breathing is so shallow that I have to put my ear to her chest to make sure she's still alive. Jake refuses to leave. Her side keeps whispering stories in her ear about all the things they're going to do when they get home. We'll build the biggest sandcastle ever, he tells her. We'll eat ice cream for breakfast. His faith that we're going to survive this is both heartbreaking and beautiful. I found the rope David had hidden, the one I thought I'd successfully concealed from him. He must have found it again before he left for his final swim attempt. There's a note tied to it, for when you're ready to stop fighting. I understand if you can't watch them suffer anymore. I love you all. Even in his final act, he was trying to take care of us, trying to give us an option when the pain becomes too much to bear. I keep thinking about the other families who died on this island. The names carved into the walls of that hidden shelter. Did they face the same choices we're facing? Did other parents hold their dying children and wonder if love means holding on or letting go? Are their spirits watching us now, understanding our pain because they lived it themselves? Jake brought me a flower today, a tiny white bloom he found growing between the rocks. For Emma, he said, so she knows we love her. I tucked it behind her ear, and for a moment, she looked like she was just sleeping peacefully in a meadow somewhere, not dying on a deserted island. Sometimes, the smallest gestures carry the most love. Day 21. Emma died in my arms this morning, just as the sun was rising. She opened her eyes one last time, looked at me and Jake and whispered, "I'm not scared anymore." Then she closed her eyes and stopped breathing, as peacefully as if she was just going to sleep. Jake held her hand the entire time, telling her it was okay to go, that Daddy was waiting for her. I don't know how long we sat there holding her. Time seemed to stop, and the world became very quiet, except for the sound of Jake crying softly beside me. My beautiful little girl, who loved butterflies and fairy tales and chocolate chip cookies, was gone. The light had gone out of her eyes, and with it, the last of my hope. Jake helped me carry Emma to the spring where we'd been getting our water. It seemed like the most peaceful place on the island, surrounded by green plants and the gentle sound of flowing water. We found a soft patch of earth beneath a tree, and Jake insisted on digging the grave himself. "She's my sister," he said when I tried to help. "I need to take care of her." We wrapped Emma in David's shirt. The blue one, she always said, made his eyes look pretty. Jake picked flowers to put in her hair, and I sang her favorite lullaby one last time. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." My voice broke on every word, but I made it through the entire song because she deserved that much from her mother. After we buried Emma, Jake carved a heart into the tree above her grave. His hands were shaking from weakness, but he was determined to mark the spot so we'd always be able to find her. Inside the heart, he carved Emma in careful letters. "So everyone knows she was here," he explained. "So everyone knows she was loved. I don't know how to keep going without her. Emma was the light in our family, the one who could make anyone smile even on the worst days. She faced her death with more courage than I'm facing my life. How do you continue breathing when half your heart is buried under a tree on a deserted island?" Jake is trying to take care of me now, bringing me water and telling me stories to cheer me up. He's 7 years old and has lost his father and sister, but he's still trying to comfort his broken mother. The strength of children never ceases to amaze me. They can find hope in the darkest places, love in the most desperate circumstances. Day 22. Jake is getting weaker. I can see it in the way he moves, the way he struggles to keep his eyes open. We're both starving, both dehydrated, both ready to join Emma and David. But Jake keeps fighting, keeps trying to stay strong for me. "We have to tell people about Emma," he says. "We have to make sure they know how brave she was." I've been thinking about David's rope, about the choice he left for me. It would be so easy to end this suffering, to stop watching my last child fade away before my eyes. But every time I consider it, I think about Jake's determination to survive, his faith that someone will find us. How can I give up when he refuses to? We found another message today carved into a rock near the shore. "Tell my wife I tried to come home. Michael Torres, 1999. Another father who died trying to save his family. Another man who fought until the very end." This island is a graveyard of love and desperation, a place where families come to die together rather than live apart. Jake asked me today if we're going to see Emma and Daddy again. I told him, yes, someday we will, whether it's in heaven or when we join them here on the island. He nodded solemnly and said, good. I miss them. Then he went back to collecting shells for Emma's grave, as if death was just another part of life to be accepted and honored. Day 23. I can barely write anymore. My hands shake so badly that the words come out as scribbles. Jake is sleeping most of the time now, and when he's awake, he talks about seeing Emma playing by the water. She's waiting for us, he says with such certainty that I almost believe him. I keep thinking about our last normal day at home. We were packing for this trip, and Emma was so excited about seeing dolphins. Jake was worried about getting seasick, and David was checking the weather forecast for the 100th time. We were just an ordinary family planning an ordinary vacation. How did we end up here? How did love and adventure turn into death and despair? If someone finds this journal, please know that we were happy once. We loved each other fiercely, completely, without reservation. David was a good father who died trying to save his children. Emma was a bright light who faced death with courage. Jake is the bravest little boy who ever lived, and he deserves to be remembered for his strength. Tell our families that we thought of them at the end. Tell them we're sorry we couldn't come home. Tell them that love doesn't end just because life does, and that somewhere beyond this island, we're all together again. Day 24. Jake died in his sleep last night. I woke up this morning and he was gone, as peacefully as Emma had left us. His last words to me were, "Tell Emma I'm coming." He's buried beside his sister now, under the same tree, with another heart carved into the bark. Jake sits right next to Emma, and they'll never be separated again. I'm alone now. Completely, utterly alone. The silence is deafening without Jake's voice, without his stories and songs and endless questions. The island feels bigger somehow, emptier, like it's already starting to reclaim the space where my family used to be. I found David's body this morning, washed up on the North Shore. The ocean finally gave him back to us, and I buried him near the children so our family could be together. 4 graves under the tree by the spring. A mother, a father, a daughter, a son. We came here as a family, and we'll stay here as a family. I don't have much time left. I can feel my body shutting down, my mind starting to drift. But I needed to finish this story, needed to make sure someone knows what happened to the Henderson family. We weren't just statistics in a Coast Guard report. We were real people with real love and real dreams that ended on this island. The rope is still here, David's final gift to me, but I don't think I'll need it. I can feel myself fading naturally, and there's a strange peace in that. I'll die the same way my children did, quietly, surrounded by love, ready to join the people who matter most. If you're reading this, please don't let our story end here. Find our families. Tell them we love them. Tell them we're together. And please, please make sure no other family ends up on this island. Make sure no other children have to die in a place so far from home. Sarah closed the journal with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of the Henderson family's tragedy settled over her. The silence of the island felt different now, not peaceful, but heavy with the echoes of suffering and loss. She could almost hear Emma's laughter carried on the wind, Jake's voice singing lullabies, Jennifer's desperate prayers for rescue that never came. The Coast Guard helicopter had been circling for the past hour, and Sarah knew she needed to signal them, but she felt paralyzed by what she'd just read. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was a story of love and loss so profound that it changed everything about how she viewed life, family, and the fragility of human existence. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez's voice crackled through her radio. "Dr. Chen, we need you to guide us to a landing site. Are you ready for extraction?" Sarah wiped her eyes and picked up the radio. "Commander, I need you to bring a full forensic team. What I found here, it's not just the Henderson family. This island has been claiming lives for decades. I've found evidence of multiple families, multiple tragedies. We're looking at a maritime disaster site that's been active for at least 30 years. The gravity in her voice must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because Rodriguez's response was immediate and professional. "Copy that, Dr. Chen. We're bringing in additional support, anthropologists, historians, and a full recovery team. Can you mark the locations of any remains you've found?" Sarah looked toward the spring where Jennifer had described burying her children. Commander. There's a tree near the freshwater spring on the island's interior. The Henderson children are buried there, Emma and Jake. Their father David is buried nearby. Jennifer. I need to find Jennifer's remains. She spent the next hour searching the area around the shelter, following the clues from Jennifer's final entries. Near the rope that David had left for his wife, she found what she was looking for: bones scattered by years of weather and wildlife, but unmistakably human. Jennifer Henderson had died alone, the last member of her family to succumb to the island's cruel isolation. When the Coast Guard team finally landed, Sarah led them through the island like a tour guide through hell. She showed them the shelter where the family had lived their final weeks, the spring where the children were buried, the scattered remains of previous victims. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of the island's dark history. Dr. Amanda Walsh, the forensic anthropologist, examined the carved hearts on the tree with professional detachment, but Sarah could see the emotion in her eyes. These are definitely recent, she confirmed. The carving is clean, probably made within the last 15 to 20 years. And the positioning of the remains beneath the tree matches the journal's description perfectly. As the team worked to carefully excavate and document each gravesite, Sarah found herself drawn back to the shelter where the Henderson family had spent their final days. She could picture them there, David pacing frantically while Jennifer tried to comfort the children, Emma and Jake huddled together for warmth, the family slowly starving while hope faded like the setting sun. Dr. Chen? Rodriguez approached her with a grim expression. We've found evidence of at least 6 different family groups on this island, spanning from the 1980s to the Henderson case in 2001. The, carved messages in that hidden shelter you mentioned tell a story of systematic tragedy. Families keep getting stranded here, and none of them survive long enough for rescue. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. The currents around this island are treacherous. Once you're here, swimming to the mainland is virtually impossible, and it's far enough from shipping lanes that passing boats wouldn't notice distress signals. It's a perfect trap. We're going to recommend that the Coast Guard establish a permanent monitoring station here, Rodriguez continued. Motion sensors, emergency supply caches, regular patrols. No family should ever have to go through what the Hendersons experienced. As the sun began to set on Sarah's second day on the island, she stood at Emma's grave and read the final entry in Jennifer's journal one more time. The words hit her differently now, surrounded by the evidence of the family's love and loss. This wasn't just a story about death. It was a testament to the power of love to endure even in the darkest circumstances. The helicopter ride back to the mainland was quiet, with Sarah clutching Jennifer's journal against her chest like a sacred text. She knew that her life had been fundamentally changed by what she'd experienced on the island. The Henderson family's story would stay with her forever, a reminder of how precious and fragile life really is. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the National Maritime Safety Conference, Jennifer's journal open on the podium before her. She had been invited to speak about her discovery, but more importantly, about the need for better safety protocols and monitoring systems to prevent future tragedies. The Henderson family didn't die because they were careless or unprepared, she told the audience. They died because they loved each other enough to take a family vacation, because they trusted that the ocean would be kind to them, because they believed that help would come when they needed it most. Their tragedy could happen to any of us, to any family that chooses to explore the beauty and danger of the sea. She went on to describe the island's history, the pattern of families becoming stranded and dying alone, the need for emergency beacons and regular patrols. But what stayed with the audience long after her presentation ended was her reading of Jennifer's final words, a mother's love. Letter to a world that had failed to save her children. The Henderson Island Monitoring Station was established 6 months later, equipped with motion sensors, emergency supplies, and a direct communication link to Coast Guard headquarters. A plaque near the freshwater spring reads, "In memory of the families who found refuge here but could not find their way home, may their love light the way for others." Sarah visits the island twice a year now, bringing fresh flowers for the graves and checking on the monitoring equipment. She's never encountered another stranded family, and she prays she never will. But she knows that if someone does find themselves trapped on that island, they won't die alone and forgotten like the Hendersons did. The journal remains in Sarah's possession, a reminder of the thin line between adventure and tragedy, between love and loss. Sometimes she reads Jennifer's words to her own children, not to frighten them, but to help them understand how precious their family really is. Because the Henderson family's greatest gift wasn't their tragic end. It was their demonstration of love's power to endure even in the face of impossible circumstances. In the end, Jennifer Henderson got her wish. Someone did find her journal. Someone did tell their story. And because of their sacrifice, no other family will ever have to face the same fate alone. Their love became a lighthouse, guiding others away from the rocks that claimed their lives. The island still stands in the Atlantic, but it's no longer a place of death and despair. It's a monument to love, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to protect and care for each other. The Henderson family may have died on that island, but their love lives on, saving lives they'll never know about, protecting families they'll never meet. And somewhere in the sound of the waves against the shore, in the whisper of wind through the trees, their voices can still be heard, not crying out in despair, but singing lullabies of love that will echo through eternity. Note, this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.